They hated everything. They thought I was a loser. How come I was 30 and still wasn't married? Wasn't Ed Asner's character Jewish? What about Rhoda? Why is she so mean to Mary? All of.
In the golden age of television, when laughter echoed through living rooms across America and black and white screens carried stories that would define generations, few partnerships shined as brightly or as mysteriously as that of Mary Tyler Moore and Dick Van Dyke. Together, they created magic on the Dick Van Dyke Show, a series that would go on to become one of the most beloved sitcoms in television history. Their chemistry was undeniable, their comedic timing flawless, and their on-screen marriage so convincing that audiences believed they were witnessing something truly authentic. But behind the laughter, behind the perfectly timed punchlines and the effortless charm, there existed a deeper, more complex story, one that remained largely unspoken for years. The public saw only the polished surface, a groundbreaking show that redefined television comedy, a partnership that seemed effortless, and a professional relationship that appeared free of tension. Mary Tyler Moore, with her grace, intelligence, and quiet strength, quickly became a symbol of modern womanhood, while Dick Van Dyke brought energy, charisma, and comedic brilliance that anchored the show's success. Yet, as time passed and the years created distance from those early days, Moore would begin to reflect on what truly happened behind the scenes, on the pressures, the challenges, and the unspoken realities that shaped one of television's most iconic collaborations. What makes this story so compelling is not scandal or controversy, but the subtle, human complexity that often lies beneath great success. In interviews later in life, Mary Tyler Moore spoke candidly about the dynamics on set, revealing that while there was deep respect and admiration between her and Dick Van Dyke, the journey was not without its struggles. The pressure to maintain perfection in front of the camera, to deliver consistent excellence in a rapidly evolving industry, created an environment where emotions were often contained, where vulnerability had little room to surface. Moore, who was relatively new to television when the show began, found herself navigating not only the demands of performance, but also the expectations placed upon her as a woman in a male-dominated industry. She carried the responsibility of representing a new kind of female character, independent, intelligent, and modern, at a time when such portrayals were still rare. This added layer of pressure shaped her experience, influencing how she approached her role and how she interacted with those around her. Meanwhile, Dick Van Dyke, already an established performer, faced his own challenges, balancing the weight of leading a hit show with the expectations that came with it. Despite these pressures, what emerged on screen was nothing short of extraordinary. Episodes of the Dick Van Dyke Show continue to be studied and admired for their writing, performances, and innovative approach to storytelling. The connection between Moore and Van Dyke became the heart of the series, a reflection of both their talent and their ability to channel real emotions into their work. It is perhaps this authenticity, this blending of performance and lived experience, that made their on-screen relationship so believable, so enduring, yet, as Moore would later reveal, maintaining that level of authenticity required discipline, restraint, and at times, personal sacrifice. The long hours, the constant rehearsals, and the relentless pace of production left little room for personal expression or emotional release. Moments of tension, though rarely visible to the public, were part of the reality of creating something so consistently excellent. And while there was no dramatic fallout or explosive conflict, there was a quiet understanding between them, a recognition of the effort and dedication required to sustain their partnership. What Moore's reflections ultimately highlight is a profound respect that existed between Ho and Van Dyke. Despite the challenges, despite the pressures, their collaboration was built on mutual admiration and a shared commitment to their craft. This foundation allowed them to navigate the complexities of their working relationship and to create something that would stand the test of time. It is a testament to their professionalism and their artistry that, even under such conditions, they were able to deliver performances that continue to resonate with audiences decades later as the years passed, and both actors moved on to new projects. The legacy of their work on The Dick Van Dyke Show only grew stronger. For Mary Tyler Moore, it became a defining chapter in a career that would include groundbreaking roles and continued success. For Dick Van Dyke, it reinforced his place as one of television's most beloved figures. And for audiences, it remained a source of joy, nostalgia, and inspiration, a reminder of a time when storytelling felt both simple and profound. At IN breaking her silence, Mary Tyler Moore did not seek to diminish the magic of what they created, but rather to add depth to it. Her reflections invite us to look beyond the surface, to understand that even the most seamless performances are often the result of hard work, perseverance, and quiet resilience. They remind us that behind every iconic moment lies a story of human effort, of individuals striving to create something meaningful despite the challenges they face. And perhaps that is a true legacy of Mary Tyler Moore and Dick Van Dyke, not just the laughter they brought into millions of homes, but the example they set as artists committed to their craft. Their story is not one of perfection, but of dedication, not of effortless success, but of intentional excellence. It is a story that continues to inspire, to resonate, and to remind us that the most enduring achievements are often built not on what is seen, but on what is quietly endured behind the scenes that as time moved forward and the distance from those early years grew. The reflections of Mary Tyler Moore began to take on a deeper emotional clarity, one shaped not only by memory, but by perspective. Looking back on her time with Dick Van Dyke, she began to speak not just about the work, but about the environment that surrounded it, the unspoken expectations, the subtle pressures, and the quiet realities that defined life behind one of television's most iconic productions. What had once been carefully maintained behind studio doors slowly transformed into a more honest narrative, one that revealed the human side of a partnership the world had long idealized that in those early days of the Dick Van Dyke Show. The industry itself was undergoing a transformation. Television was no longer just an emerging medium. It was becoming a dominant force in entertainment, shaping culture and redefining storytelling. With that evolution came increased pressure on performers to deliver not just consistency, but excellence at an unprecedented level. For Moore, this meant stepping into a role that demanded emotional intelligence, comedic precision, and a level of professionalism that left little room for error. She was not just playing a character, she was helping to redefine what a female lead could be on television. Yet, as Moore would later acknowledge, that responsibility came with a cost. The expectation to appear composed, confident, and effortless often masked the internal challenges she faced. There were moments of uncertainty, of questioning whether she truly belonged in such a high-pressure environment, especially alongside a seasoned performer like Dick Van Dyke. But rather than allowing those doubts to surface, she channeled them into a performance, transforming vulnerability into strength, hesitation into precision. It was this quiet resilience that became one of her defining traits, both on and off screen at the same time. Dick Van Dyke himself was navigating his own set of challenges, though they were often less visible to the public eye. As the central figure of the show, he carried the weight of its success, balancing the demands of performance with the expectations of leadership. Moore would later reflect on how, beneath his natural charm and comedic brilliance, there existed a deep sense of responsibility, a drive to ensure that every episode met the high standards they had set. This shared commitment to excellence created a bond between them, one built not on perfection, but on mutual understanding and respect. However, what makes Moore's later revelation so compelling is the acknowledgement that even the strongest professional relationships are not without their complexities. There were moments, quiet, often unspoken, where tension would surface, where the pressures of production, long hours, and creative demands would test the limits of patience and endurance. These moments did not define their relationship, but they were part of it, adding layers of depth to a partnership that the public had long perceived as effortless, and yet it is precisely within these complexities that the true strength of their collaboration can be found. Rather than allowing challenges to divide them, Moore and Van Dyke used them as opportunities to refine their work, to push each other toward greater authenticity and precision. Their performances became richer, more nuanced, infused with an understanding that could only come from shared experience. The laughter that audiences heard was genuine, but it was also hard-earned, a reflection of countless hours of dedication, discipline, and collaboration that as Moore continued to reflect on those years. Her words carried not bitterness, but a sense of appreciation, an acknowledgement of what they had accomplished together and the unique circumstances that made it possible. She spoke of Van Dyke with respect, recognizing his talent, his generosity, and his role in creating an environment where she could grow as a performer. In tone, her own contributions helped elevate the show, bringing a balance and depth that would become essential to its success. The legacy of the Dick Van Dyke Show is often measured in awards, ratings, and its enduring popularity, but Moore's reflections remind us that its true impact lies in something more intangible. It lies in the relationships that shaped it, the challenges that strengthened it, and the quiet moments of perseverance that allowed it to flourish. It is a legacy built not just on what was seen, but on what was felt, on the dedication of individuals who committed themselves fully to their craft that I am breaking her silence. Mary Tyler Moore offers us a rare glimpse into the reality behind the image, inviting us to see beyond the polished surface and to appreciate the human effort that defines great art. Her story is not about dismantling a legacy, but about enriching it, adding layers of truth that make it more meaningful, more relatable, and ultimately more enduring. And as we listen to her words, we are reminded that even the most iconic partnerships are built on a foundation of hard work, mutual respect, and the willingness to navigate challenges together. It is this foundation that allowed Mary Tyler Moore and Dick Van Dyke to create something timeless, something that continues to resonate with audiences long after the final episode aired, a testament not just to their talent, but to their resilience, their dedication, and the quiet strength that defined their journey behind the scenes. As the years continued to pass and the legacy of Mary Tyler Moore became even more deeply woven into the fabric of television history, her reflections took on an even more profound tone, one that carried not only honesty, but a quiet sense of closure. With time comes clarity, and for Moore, that clarity revealed not just the challenges she had faced alongside Dick Van Dyke, but the extraordinary nature of what they had accomplished together. What once felt like pressure, uncertainty, and emotional restraint now appeared as necessary elements in the creation of something truly timeless. Looking back, Moore began to recognize that the environment of the Dick Van Dyke Show, while demanding, had also been a rare space for growth. It pushed her beyond her limits, challenged her instincts, and ultimately shaped her into one of the most respected actresses of her generation. The same pressures that once felt overwhelming became, in retrospect, the very forces that refined her craft, strengthened her resolve, and deepened her understanding of performance. It was within those long hours, those moments of doubt, and those silent struggles that a true artistry was forged. Her perspective on Dick Van Dyke also evolved with time. What had once been seen through the lens of professional hierarchy and responsibility was now understood with greater empathy and appreciation. Moore acknowledged that Van Dyke, too, was navigating a complex landscape, one that required him to lead, to perform, and to carry the expectations of an entire production. His humor, his energy, and his ability to bring lightness to even the most demanding situations were not just natural gifts, but essential tools that helped sustain the atmosphere on set. In many ways, his presence provided balance, offsetting the intensity of the work with moments of genuine joy and spontaneity. What emerges from Moore's later reflections is not a story of conflict, but one of duality, a partnership defined by both challenge and harmony, by both pressure and creativity. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a recognition that what they were creating required sacrifice, discipline, and unwavering commitment. And while those sacrifices were not always visible, they were deeply felt, shaping not only their performances but their personal journeys as well. Moore also began to speak more openly about the emotional toll of maintaining composure in such a high-stakes environment. The expectation to appear flawless, to deliver perfection take after take, often meant suppressing vulnerability, setting aside personal feelings in favor of professional demands. Yet it was precisely this ability to channel emotion, to transform inner complexity into outward expression, that made her performances so compelling. Audiences may not have known the full extent of what she carried, but they felt it in every glance, every line, every moment of silence that spoke louder than words. Today, as the cultural significance of the Dick Van Dyke Show continued to grow, so too did the appreciation for the subtle dynamics that defined it. Critics and historians began to recognize the show not just as a comedic masterpiece, but as a groundbreaking exploration of relationships, identity, and the evolving role of women in society. At the center of its evolution was Mary Tyler Moore, whose portrayal brought depth, intelligence, and authenticity to a role that might otherwise have been conventional. Her collaboration with Dick Van Dyke became a blueprint for on-screen partnerships, demonstrating how mutual respect and shared commitment could elevate storytelling to new heights. That in her later years, Moore's voice carried a sense of peace, a recognition that every challenge, every moment of tension, had contributed to something far greater than the sum of its parts. She did not dwell on what was difficult, but instead chose to honor what was achieved. Her reflections were not about rewriting history, but about illuminating it, adding context and depth to a narrative that had long been simplified by nostalgia. And perhaps that is the most powerful aspect of her silence finally being broken, not the revelation of hidden struggles, but the affirmation of enduring respect. Despite the pressures, despite the complexities, the bond between Mary Tyler Moore and Dick Van Dyke remained intact, rooted in a shared understanding of what it meant to create something meaningful. Their partnership was not perfect, but it was real, and it was precisely that authenticity that allowed their work to resonate so deeply with audiences that in the end, Moore's story reminds us that behind every iconic moment lies a deeper truth, a truth shaped by effort, resilience, and the quiet determination to succeed against all odds. Her journey, intertwined with that of Dick Van Dyke, stands as a testament to the power of collaboration, the importance of perspective, and the enduring impact of artistry born from both challenge and triumph. It is a legacy that continues to inspire, not because it was flawless, but because it was human, rich with complexity, grounded in dedication, and elevated by the unwavering pursuit of excellence that as the story reaches its most reflective and revealing phase, the voice of Mary Tyler Moore carries something even more powerful than revelation. It carries understanding. With the passage of time, what once felt like unspoken tension or silent endurance now transforms into something richer, more meaningful, and undeniably human. Her reflections are no longer about what was hidden, but about what was learned. And in those lessons lies the true heart of her experience alongside Dick Van Dyke. There is a quiet honesty in the way Moore revisits those years, a sense that the silence she maintained for so long was not rooted in fear, but in respect for the work, for the people involved, and for the legacy they were building together. Breaking that silence, then, is not about exposing flaws, but about honoring truth. It is about acknowledging that even the most seamless performances are built on effort, discipline, and moments of doubt that never reach the audience. It is about reminding us that behind every iconic scene lies a reality far more complex than what appears on screen. What becomes increasingly clear is that Moore's journey was one of transformation, not just as an actress, but as an individual navigating an industry that was still learning how to embrace change. Her role on The Dick Van Dyke Show placed her at the forefront of that evolution, challenging expectations and redefining what a leading woman could represent. And while those changes were celebrated publicly, the personal cost of carrying that responsibility remained largely unseen. It required strength, composure, and an unwavering commitment to excellence, even in moments when the weight of expectation felt overwhelming at the same time. Her perspective on Dick Van Dyke reveals a deep and lasting appreciation. She speaks not just of his talent, but of his humanity, his ability to bring levity to demanding situations, his dedication to the craft, and his role in shaping an environment where creativity could thrive. Their partnership, while not without its challenges, was built on a foundation that ultimately proved unshakable: mutual respect. And it is this respect that allowed them to navigate the complexities of their collaboration, turning potential friction into fuel for something greater that as Moore reflects on the emotional landscape of those years. She does so with a sense of grace that mirrors the very qualities that made her performances so unforgettable. She acknowledges the moments of vulnerability, the internal struggles, and the discipline required to maintain composure under pressure. Yet she does not dwell on them as burdens. Instead, she recognizes them as essential elements of growth, experiences that shaped her, strengthened her, and ultimately defined the depth she brought to her wake. The enduring legacy of The Dick Van Dyke Show is often celebrated for its humor and innovation, but Moore's reflections remind us that its true brilliance lies in its authenticity. It is a show that resonates not just because it made people laugh, but because it captured something real, something rooted in genuine human connection, in shared effort, and in the quiet understanding between two performers committed to creating something meaningful. In the final analysis, what Mary Tyler Moore reveals is not a hidden scandal or dramatic secret, but something far more powerful: the truth of what it takes to create greatness. It is a truth defined by resilience, collaboration, and the willingness to endure challenges in pursuit of excellence. Her story invites us to look beyond the surface, to appreciate the unseen work that underpins every success, and to recognize the humanity behind even the most iconic achievements. And so, as her voice brings this chapter to a close, we are left not with a sense of disillusionment, but with a deeper appreciation for the artistry, for the partnership, and for the journey itself. The story of Mary Tyler Moore and Dick Van Dyke is not diminished by truth. It is enriched by it. It stands as a reminder that behind every moment of brilliance lies a story of effort, understanding, and quiet strength, a story that continues to resonate, inspire, and endure long after the final curtain has fallen. And as a final layer of reflection unfolds, the story of Mary Tyler Moore reaches a place that feels less like revelation and more like legacy, something preserved, understood, and finally complete. What she ultimately offers is not just insight into her time with Dick Van Dyke, but a rare window into the emotional truth behind one of television's most cherished eras. It is here, in this quiet closing chapter, that the full meaning of her words begins to resonate, not as a breaking of silence, but as a final piece of a story that was always waiting to be understood. She speaks with the clarity of someone who has lived through both the illusion and the reality, someone who has carried the weight of expectation and emerged with a deeper understanding of what truly matters. The laughter that once defined the Dick Van Dyke Show still echoes, but now it is accompanied by something more profound, an awareness of the effort, the discipline, and the emotional intelligence required to sustain it. Moore's reflections do not strip away the magic. They reveal the foundation beneath it, showing us that what we admire was not effortless brilliance, but carefully crafted excellence born from commitment and resilience. That I end these final thoughts. There is a sense of reconciliation, not with conflict, but with time itself. Moore acknowledges that the pressures, the expectations, and the unspoken challenges were all part of a larger journey, one that shaped her not only as an actress but as a person. She no longer views those moments as burdens, but as essential threads in the fabric of her life, threads that gave her strength, perspective, and a deeper appreciation for the art she helped create. Her words about Dick Van Dyke carry a tone of enduring respect, almost a quiet gratitude. She recognizes a unique balance they achieved, the way their differences complemented rather than divided them, and the shared understanding that allowed their partnership to thrive under extraordinary circumstances. It becomes clear that whatever complexities existed were ultimately overshadowed by mutual commitment to excellence and a shared pride in what they accomplished together. Their connection, though rooted in professional collaboration, transcended it, becoming something that would stand as a benchmark for generations of performers to come. What makes this conclusion so powerful is its simplicity. There are no dramatic confessions, no shocking revelations, only truth, delivered with grace and reflection. Moore's story reminds us that the most meaningful legacies are not defined by perfection, but by perseverance. That greatness is not the absence of struggle, but the ability to rise above it, to channel it into something that resonates far beyond the moment. That as audiences revisit the Dick Van Dyke Show today, they do so with a renewed perspective, one shaped by Moore's honesty and the depth she has added to its history. The laughter feels richer, the performances more layered, the connection between its stars more profound. What once seemed like simple entertainment now reveals itself as something far more intricate, a collaboration built on trust, effort, and an unwavering dedication to craft, and in the end, that is the true power of Mary Tyler Moore finally breaking her silence. She has not rewritten the story, she has completed it. She has taken something already beloved and given it new dimension, allowing us to see not just what was created, but how and why it endured. Her voice, calm and reflective, becomes a final note in a symphony that began decades ago, a note that lingers long after it is heard. The legacy of Mary Tyler Moore and Dick Van Dyke remains untouched in its brilliance, but now it carries something even more valuable, truth. And in that truth, we find not only a deeper appreciation for their work, but a lasting reminder that behind every iconic moment lies a story of humanity, resilience, and the quiet strength required to create something timeless. And in the final, most expansive reflection of Mary Tyler Moore's journey, the story transforms into something almost timeless, a meditation not only on her years beside Dick Van Dyke, but on the very nature of legacy, memory, and truth itself. What she ultimately leaves behind is not a revelation meant to shock, but a narrative meant to endure, one that reframes everything we thought we understood about the Dick Van Dyke Show and the people who brought it to life. It is here, in this extended closing, that her voice feels the most complete, measured, reflective, and profoundly human. She begins to speak not just about moments or memories, but about the passage of time, how distance reshapes understanding, how experiences once defined by pressure and uncertainty slowly evolve into sources of strength and clarity. The long hours on set, the constant demand of perfection, the silent expectations that hovered over every scene, these were not simply challenges, but formative experiences that forged resilience and discipline. Moore's words suggest that what once felt overwhelming was, in truth, the very environment that allowed her to discover the full depth of her capability. And in recognizing this, she transforms what could have been seen as struggle into something far more meaningful, growth. Her reflections stretch beyond the boundaries of the show itself, touching on the broader cultural moment in which it existed. Television in that era was not merely entertainment. It was a reflection of society's evolving identity, a medium through which norms were both reinforced and challenged. Moore's role placed her at the center of that evolution, carrying with it the weight of representation and expectation. She was not only performing, she was shaping perception, influencing how audiences viewed relationships, independence, and the role of women in a rapidly changing world. And while that responsibility was rarely spoken of openly at the time, it is clear in her later reflections that she felt it deeply, carrying it with quiet determination and unwavering professionalism at the same time.